June 4th, 1942. 10:15 OM, North Pacific, 150 miles northwest of Midway. On the flight deck of the carrier Akagi. The wind is sharp enough to sting the eyes, and it carries the smell of hot fuel and salt spray. The sea below is an iron sheet, broken only by the white scars of the task force's wake. Every few seconds the ship shudders as elevators clank and arresting gear rattles. A steady vibration that travels up through steel and into bone. If you were standing near the island, you would hear it all layered together. The whine of engines being warmed, the bark of petty officers, the slap of boots on planks darkened by spilled gasoline, the hiss of fire hoses laid out and ready. Because everyone on Akagi knows what a single spark can do when decks are crowded and planes are fed full of fuel, below and aft. Mechanics and armorers work with practiced speed, but speed does not mean calm. Not today. Aircraft sit with their wings folded tight, packed so closely that men must squeeze sideways between them. Aichi D-3A dive bombers, the Vals, and Nakajima B-5N torpedo bombers. The Kates wait like coiled tools. Some still carry the dust of earlier handling, but now their skin gleams with fresh wipe-downs. On carts and racks, munitions appear and disappear 250-kilogram bombs, smaller fragmentation loads, torpedoes with their metal bodies dull and cold. The smell is fuel, oil, sweat, and the faint, sour bite of cordite from test-fired guns. Vice Admiral Chuichi Nagumo is not on the deck, but the deck is the truth that climbs up into his flag bridge. He stands inside the ship's island, shoulders tight beneath his uniform, listening to voices that come and go through sound-powered phones. Beside him, Rear Admiral Ryunosuke Kusaka, his chief of staff, keeps his face still, but his eyes move constantly. Calculating, they have already launched a strike at Midway at dawn. They have already received reports that Midway is not finished. Another strike is needed. That is the problem that has been grinding at Nagumo for hours, turning decision into delay and delay into danger. A message is repeated up the chain, clipped and urgent. Midway's defenses are damaged but not crushed. Planes on the atoll still fight. The Americans are still alive. Nagumo's staff hovers over charts and the carrier's launch cycle like surgeons arguing over an incision. The plan was supposed to be clean hit Midway, draw out the American carriers, destroy them when they appear. The Japanese combined fleet had built a trap with careful geometry. But traps require the prey to behave. Out on the horizon, destroyers throw up spray as they carve their screening arcs. In the sky, the combat air patrol circles in wide loops, Zeros sliding through pale clouds. Every pilot up there is straining his neck, scanning for dots that should not be there yet. And then comes the nagging thread that will later feel like a knife you never noticed until it was already inside you. The scout report that is late, incomplete, and somehow wrong in the way that matters most. From the heavy cruiser, Tone, a scout plane had launched behind schedule. That delay is small on paper, but in war it becomes a canyon. When the message finally arrives, it is cautious at first, almost polite in its uncertainty. Sighted enemy ships, course and speed, no carrier mentioned. Kusaka leans in, and his voice stays controlled, but it hardens at the edges. Confirm composition. The reply takes time that on Akagi is filled with action. Planes that had been prepared for a second strike on Midway are being rearmed. Men move bombs, then move them back. Torpedoes are rolled out, then rolled away again. The ship's elevators keep delivering aircraft up into the open, where wind and salt can touch them. Fuel lines snake across the deck like veins. Ordnance sits exposed. Safety procedures are followed, but safety can only do so much when the deck is crowded and the schedule is bleeding minutes. Nagumo's mind keeps returning to the same fear if American carriers are out there. He must find them first, hit them first, and hit them with everything. But if he launches now with the wrong weapons, he risks a weak punch. If he waits, he risks being struck while his own aircraft are half prepared, half armed, half moved, the worst possible state for a carrier. You can feel the indecision spreading, not as panic, but as tension. Officers speak softer, as if volume might break something. Runners move faster. The deck crews work with clenched jaws. Everyone can sense that the battle is near, but no one can touch it yet. Then the scout report updates, and the words land like stones in a quiet room. Enemy includes carrier for a heartbeat. Nothing moves on the bridge, not because they do not understand, but because understanding is instant and complete. The trap they intended to spring might already be closing around them. Kusaka's eyes flick to Nagumo. The thought that forms behind them is not spoken aloud yet, but it is there, sharp and terrible. The Americans are exactly where they should not be, and they are here exactly when they should not be. That kind of timing does not feel like chance. It feels like someone has been reading your mind. Nagumo's mouth tightens. Outside, on the flight deck, the planes sit packed and vulnerable, their bellies full, their weapons exposed. Up in the sky, Zeros keep circling, and the horizon looks empty, but emptiness can lie. The Tone Scout's message hangs in the air of Akagi's flag bridge like smoke you cannot wave away. Enemy includes carrier. The phrase is repeated, confirmed, then repeated again. Each repetition stripping away the last comfort of ambiguity. Nagumo's staff shifts from argument to execution. Orders begin to move with the sharpness of reflex. But reflex cannot erase what has already happened. The flight decks are full. The hangars are active. Ordnance is out. Fuel lines are still in use. The carriers are in that dangerous in-between state where every decision made in the last hour has left a physical mark in steel, hose, and bomb cart. Nagumo's eyes go to the clock. The numbers matter, not because he trusts time to be neat, but because he understands exactly how long it takes to bring order to a carrier deck. He knows how long it takes to strike below. Clear the deck, spot aircraft, start engines, and launch in disciplined waves. He knows the drill down to the minute. And now, the minute is against him. Rear Admiral Kusaka leans in and speaks low, as if lowering his voice might keep the ocean from hearing. We must launch immediately. He gestures to the plotted position of the American contact. If their carriers are within range, they will strike. Our decks are not ready to receive a blow. Nagumo says nothing at first. Silence on a flagship is not emptiness. It is weight. Every man around him feels it, and they wait. Because in that silence, the battle's shape is being decided. But Nagumo has another problem, one that makes him cautious in a way his subordinates misread as hesitation. The scout report is incomplete. One carrier. How many, which, where, exactly the Americans have been elusive for months. A premature launch might waste the only chance to hit them decisively. He turns to the operations officers. Confirm the enemy force. Find the carriers. The bridge answers with a flurry of phone calls, radio relays, and the rapid tapping of signalmen. Another scout is sent. Another request for confirmation. But confirmation is a currency paid in time, and the Japanese do not have enough left to spend. Below on Akagi's hangar deck, the result of the earlier decisions is visible in harsh light. B-5N Kates sit with their cowls open, maintenance crews wiping hands on cloth, eyes flicking up at supervisors. Some aircraft have torpedoes nearby, others have bombs. The rearming process is half complete. The deck crews are doing what they have been told, but what they have been told keeps changing. On the neighboring carriers, Kaga, Soryu, Hiryu. The scene is similar. The same smell of fuel, the same clatter of elevator machinery, the same racks of munitions too exposed for comfort, the same quiet fear that comes from knowing your ship is a floating tank of gasoline and explosives, protected only by distance and luck. Out over the ocean, the combat air patrol is already fighting its own battle. American planes have come in waves, scattered and piecemeal, torpedo squadrons flying low and straight into gunfire. The Japanese fighter direction teams track them and vector Zeros down, and the Zeros dive with a predatory certainty. From Nagumo's bridge, those attacks look like reassurance. The enemy is coming in disorganized thrusts, and the Zeros are cutting them apart. The anti-aircraft guns are roaring. The sky is full of black bursts and falling aircraft. It is brutal, but in its brutality there is a dangerous comfort. Kusaka is not comforted. He watches the pattern of the attacks and sees something else. These American torpedo planes are not trying to win. They are trying to make space. They are pulling Zeros down low. They are keeping the combat air patrol occupied. They are forcing the Japanese carriers to maneuver, to turn into the wind, to break flight operations rhythm. And that kind of sacrifice makes sense only if something else is coming. On the bridge, a staff officer holds up another message slip, his fingers tight around the paper. It is from the Midway strike leaders returning from the atoll. They report heavy resistance earlier. They request a second strike. The plan demands it. The logic of the operation demands it. But the ocean does not care about plan logic. Nagumo takes the slip, reads it, and for a moment the conflict inside him becomes visible in the stiffness of his jaw. If he turns his full strength against the American carrier now, he might leave Midway intact enough to continue fighting, perhaps even to launch another attack. If he ignores the American carrier contact to finish Midway, he risks losing his carriers in exchange for an island. The combined fleet did not come here for an island. Kusaka speaks again, sharper now. Admiral, if we delay, we may be struck while we are preparing. Our decks are loaded. Nagumo's reply is measured, but the meaning is grim. We must have certainty. In that moment, several officers exchange quick glances. They hear, not indecision, but an older fear. The Americans, somehow, have appeared at exactly the moment when the Japanese carriers are most vulnerable. That coincidence scratches at the mind. The Japanese had believed their plan was secret, their approach hidden, their timing precise. So how is the enemy here now? The answer is not yet spoken as a declaration, but it begins as suspicion, and suspicion spreads faster than orders. Somewhere nearby, a communications officer, trained to keep his face blank, cannot hide a slight tightening around his eyes. He has been living with codes, with call signs, with the daily rhythm of encrypted traffic. The thought crosses his mind that the Americans might have read something, guessed something, anticipated something. Not all of it, perhaps, but enough. Nagumo's bridge remains disciplined. No one panics. No one shouts. But discipline does not mean peace. It means fear held in a fist. Then the air outside changes. It is subtle at first, like a pressure shift before a storm. The Zeros are still low, tangled with torpedo planes. The anti-aircraft guns have been firing for so long that their barrels glow faintly and the air around them shimmers. A lookout's voice cuts through the ship's sound-powered phone. Net. Urgent and high. Dive bombers. High altitude. Approaching. For an instant, Nagumo's men cannot process it. High altitude. Not low torpedo planes. High means out of the cap's reach, out of its attention, coming in where the sky had looked empty. Kusaka's head snaps up. His eyes go to the plotted vectors. His mouth opens as if to speak, but the words are swallowed by the sudden roar outside. And in Nagumo's face, a flicker of realization hardens into something colder than fear. This is not random. This is not a lucky sighting. This is timing that feels engineered. The trap is not theirs anymore. June 4th, 1942. 10:22. The first American dive bombers appear as tiny specks at the top of the world, so high they seem almost motionless. Then they tip forward and gravity grabs them. On Akagi, the shout reaches the flight deck like a slap. Men look up and their faces change in an instant, from concentration to disbelief to raw urgency. The whine of aircraft engines on deck is suddenly drowned out by a deeper sound, a rising scream that grows as the attackers descend. Up on the bridge, Nagumo and Kusaka step to the windows. The sky is a pale dome, and the specks are now visible as aircraft. Wings catching light, diving in steep angles that feel impossible. You can almost see the order in it. Separate lines, each group committing, each pilot choosing a ship. The air defense teams react, but reaction is not enough. Zeros are low. The ship's guns begin to elevate, their crews swinging barrels skyward. The first bursts of flak blossom above the carriers like dark flowers. But the dive bombers are already inside that space, already too close. Across the water, Kaga is a dark slab of steel, turning, wake curling white. Her deck is crowded too, spotted with aircraft in various states of readiness. Fuel hoses lie across planks. Ordnance carts stand like abandoned furniture in a house about to burn. A Dauntless dives on Kaga, its wings shuddering in the speed of the descent. The pilot holds the ship centered in his sight, a calm point in a screaming world. Bomb release. The plane jolts lighter. It pulls up hard, and the pilot's vision narrows as blood tries to leave his head. The bomb hits. On Kaga, the impact is not a neat explosion. It is a violent punch that tears through deck plating into hangar space where aircraft sit fueled and armed. Fire leaps up as if it has been waiting. A sheet of orange erupts and rolls outward, consuming air. Men on deck are thrown, some lifted and then slammed down. The deck planks vanish under smoke and flame, and the carrier's whole body seems to flinch. A second bomb follows, then a third. The deck becomes a landscape of sudden craters and open wounds. Fuel ignites in streams, running like liquid fire along seams and down openings. Ordnance cooks off with sharp cracks and deeper detonations that shake the ship. On Akagi, a Dauntless comes down almost vertically. Its dive breaks screaming. Japanese gunners track it and fire, but the aircraft is a falling knife. The bomb hits near the center line, close enough to the aircraft elevators that the deck crew feels the strike through their boots before they hear it. The blast tears through the flight deck and into the hangar. Inside, where planes are packed wingtip to wingtip, where torpedoes and bombs sit exposed, the explosion becomes something worse than a hole. It becomes a spark in a room full of fumes. Flames punch upward through the deck like fists. Smoke surges through vents and access points. Men who had been running toward their stations are suddenly running anywhere. Hands up, faces turned away from heat that strips breath from lungs. Nagumo's bridge shakes. The windows rattle. The smell reaches them even inside. The bitter chemical stink of burning fuel and paint, mixed with the choking bite of explosives. A staff officer grabs the edge of a chart table as the ship vibrates again, not from the bomb, but from secondary blasts below. Kusaka's voice rises above the din, sharp with instinct. Damage report. His words are clipped, but there is a tremor behind them now. Not fear, but the sheer urgency of a man watching a plan collapse into fire. The phones light up with frantic voices. Reports are incomplete, overlapping. Fire in the hangar. Fire near the forward elevator. Aircraft burning. Ordnance exploding. Casualties on deck. The flight deck is unusable. Nagumo's face is pale in the light coming through the bridge windows, but his posture stays rigid. He looks out and sees smoke rising from Kaga as well, thick and black, climbing fast. He sees Soryu hit too. Flames bursting up. Hiryu is still moving, still intact, but even she is maneuvering in the chaos, turning hard, trying to stay alive. The Japanese carriers, the heart of the force, are suddenly not instruments of attack, but objects on fire, pinned by physics and fate. Their decks, meant to be runways, are now open furnaces. And then, in the middle of the violence, there is a moment of clarity that cuts through everything. The American torpedo attacks, the ones that had seemed disorganized and desperate, now make sense. They were not simply attacks. They were a net. They pulled the Zeros down. They forced evasive maneuvers. They demanded attention. They created a window. And the dive bombers fell through that window at the precise instant the Japanese decks were most crowded, most vulnerable, most dangerous to themselves. That timing does not feel like luck. It feels like a hand reaching across the ocean and choosing the second. On the bridge, Kusaka turns toward Nagumo. His eyes are wide now, and his voice drops, as if saying the thought aloud might make it irreversible. They knew. Nagumo does not answer immediately. Another shudder runs through Akagi as a blast below erupts, sending a fresh pulse of smoke and heat upward. Men on the bridge instinctively lean away from the windows. Outside, the flight deck is now a broken, burning surface. In places, the planking is peeled back. In others, flames dance through gaps. A parked aircraft near the island is on fire, and the wind spreads it along a line of spilled fuel. Nagumo's silence is not confusion. It is recognition, a mental click as the puzzle pieces align into a picture too cruel to deny. Midway was not simply a target. It was bait. The Americans waited. They positioned themselves. They struck when the Japanese carriers were at their most exposed. He stares at the smoke columns rising from the other ships and sees not just damage, but consequence. The consequence of an enemy that arrived too perfectly, too accurately. When he finally speaks, his voice is quiet and heavy. This was prepared. No one on the bridge challenges him. No one can, because the evidence is not on a map. It is in the burning hangars, in the detonating munitions, in the dead and dying men on the flight decks, in the simple fact that the Americans hit the carriers like they had been watching the cycle of rearming and refueling. The realization spreads through the flagship and across the task force. Carried by radio and by the sight of smoke, the trap has snapped shut, and the men who built it are inside. The first hours after the strikes are not measured in minutes, but in fires. On Akagi, fire teams rush into choking corridors with hoses and axes, their faces wrapped in cloth, eyes squinting against smoke that burns like lye. The ship is still moving, still alive, but each compartment becomes its own battle. Inside the hangar, the heat is a living thing. Metal pops and groans, paint blisters and peels. Ammunition cooks off with sudden snaps, like someone clapping next to your ear, followed by heavier blasts that punch air through passageways. The deck above is warped. The elevators are jammed. Aircraft are no longer machines, but fuel-soaked wrecks that burn with a fierce, sustained hunger. Damage control officers shout orders that are swallowed by the roar. The men obey anyway, because obedience is the only structure left when everything else becomes chaos. Up on the bridge, Nagumo stands with his hands braced against the chart table. His flagship is no longer a command post in the clean sense. 'Tis a burning ship that still has to steer, still has to fight, still has to transmit the will of an admiral who has just watched half his striking power turn to ash. Kusaka moves among the phone operators, repeating questions, insisting on clarity, forward hangar condition, fire boundaries, flooding status. Each answer comes back broken, incomplete, sometimes contradictory, because nobody can see the whole ship now. They see only smoke and flame in their own section, and the rest is rumor. Across the sea, Kaga is a mountain of smoke. Her deck is scarred and black, and the smoke column rising from her is thick enough to form its own weather. Soryu burns too, her island wreathed in haze. The sight is surreal, like watching temples burn in slow motion while the ocean stays indifferent. Hiryu remains intact for the moment, and that single fact becomes a lifeline. From her, the remaining Japanese air groups are launched with desperate speed. On Akagi's bridge, messages report Hiryu's counterstrikes, first against Yorktown. The reports are fragmentary, but the key detail is clear: at least one American carrier is hit. For a moment, some men on the bridge cling to that as proof that the situation can still be turned. The Japanese doctrine is to strike hard and keep striking. If they can cripple American carriers, perhaps the battle becomes balanced again. But Nagumo's eyes keep returning to the smoke. Smoke is not theory. Smoke is fact. A communications officer steps in, holding a message sheet. His hands are steady, but his throat works as he swallows. Message from Combined Fleet. It is from Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto's distant flagship, far to the west with the main body. Still expecting the carrier force to be the spear tip, Nagumo reads, and for a fraction of a second his face tightens. The content is not comforting. It is demand, expectation, and the weight of an empire's confidence. Kusaka watches him and speaks softly, almost privately, despite the other men in the room. Admiral, the enemy's timing is too precise. They struck at the moment our decks were most vulnerable. Nagumo's reply is controlled, but there is no mistaking the bitterness under it. Yes, the word is small, but it carries a confession, not of incompetence, but of being outmaneuvered in a way that feels personal. The men around them, even those who do not have the full picture, have begun to sense the shift. In the Japanese Navy, there is a deep pride in planning, in the careful choreography of fleets. To be struck like this is not only a tactical blow, it is an insult to the idea of Japanese operational mastery. And insults like that demand an explanation. On the bridge, someone voices what others have been thinking in silence. It is not said as accusation. It is said as disbelief, as if the speaker is asking the air itself for an answer. How did they find us? A pause follows. The sound of distant explosions and the muted roar of the ship's own fires fill the gap. Then Kusaka answers, not with certainty, but with the kind of logic that forms when there are no other explanations left. They anticipated our operation. Either they guessed our objective, or they read our communications. He looks down at the plotted positions, at the carefully drawn arcs that now feel like mockery. This is too exact for chance. Nagumo's gaze remains fixed on the sea, but he speaks without turning. We believed we were invisible. His voice is low. We were not. That line, spoken inside a burning flagship, becomes a seed that will later grow into whole investigations, accusations, and reforms. In the moment, it is simply a brutal acknowledgement. The Americans did not stumble into this. They were waiting. Outside, the sky remains full of aircraft, but now it is a different kind of chaos. Japanese fighters scramble to cover the surviving ships. Gunners track anything that moves. Smoke obscures vision. The formation begins to loosen as captains try to maneuver around burning hulks and avoid collisions. On Akagi, an officer reports that steering is still possible, but fires are spreading. Water pressure is dropping in some lines. The fire mains are being compromised. Compartments are being sealed. Not because they want to trap men inside, but because sometimes you must sacrifice part of a ship to save the rest. Kusaka watches Nagumo for the decision he knows is coming. The decision to stay, to fight, to transfer, to abandon. Every option is bitter. A new message comes in, and the tone is more urgent now. Hiryu's second strike has hit Yorktown again, but American dive bombers have found Hiryu in return. Hiryu is on fire. The last functioning carrier is now burning as well. That news hits like another bomb, but this one lands in the mind. For a moment, even the phone operators stop moving. The Japanese carrier force, the pride of the Navy, the instrument that had shattered Pearl Harbor and swept through the Pacific, is now a row of burning giants. Nagumo exhales slowly through his nose. The sound is almost lost in the surrounding noise, but Kusaka hears it. It is the breath of a man watching an era die. Then Nagumo speaks again, and this time his words are less about immediate damage and more about the terrible pattern that has become undeniable. This operation has become the enemy's ambush. The phrase is repeated, carried down the chain. It is not theatrical. It is the simplest description of what they can see. Somewhere deeper in the ship, men fight fires without knowing the full strategic meaning of what is happening. They know only that they are inside hell, and they are trying to keep steel from turning into a coffin. Up on the bridge, Nagumo and Kusaka listen to the steady stream of casualty reports, damage estimates, and fading hopes. And in between those reports, there are short exchanges, half-spoken thoughts that reveal what they have realized. Kusaka, looking at the timing, murmurs, "It was too perfect." Nagumo answers, barely above a whisper, "Yes, too perfect." The smoke outside thickens. The flagship begins to slow as damage accumulates, and the understanding settles over the bridge like ash. They were not the hunters. They were the ones led into the open. By early afternoon, the ocean around the Japanese carriers is no longer clean blue. It is stained with oil slicks that spread in slow, glossy sheets, reflecting smoke and sunlight in broken patterns. Pieces of aircraft drift past like dead birds. Every few minutes, a muffled detonation rolls across the water, a reminder that burning ships keep killing long after the bombs stop falling. On Akagi, the fires do not stay contained. They crawl. They find fresh fuel. They move through ventilation trunks and along cable runs. Men fight them with hoses and foam, but the heat keeps returning, as if the ship has become its own furnace. Nagumo remains on the bridge longer than many expect, not out of stubbornness, but because command is a habit and he does not yet know how to stop. Every instinct in him is to stay with the flagship, to hold control, to keep the force together, but the force is already breaking. Kaga is beyond saving. Soryu is beyond saving. Hiryu is now beyond saving too. The carrier striking force, the core of the plan, has become 4 wounded animals bleeding smoke into the sky, and the American carriers are still out there, still able to strike, on the bridge. Reports arrive that the fire is approaching critical areas. The possibility of secondary explosions grows with every minute. An officer, soot streaked across his cheeks, bows and delivers the words that in the Japanese Navy carry a special kind of weight. "Admiral, the ship cannot be controlled much longer." Kusaka watches Nagumo's face for reaction. The Admiral's eyes close briefly, like someone trying to hold a thought in place. Then he opens them and looks toward the destroyers that escort Akagi, their smaller forms moving with nervous precision. The decision is made. Orders go out to prepare to transfer the flag. There is no drama in the language. It is all procedure and necessity. But to the men on Akagi, to watch their commander prepare to leave the ship, it feels like the end of something sacred. Nagumo steps out onto the bridge wing for a moment. The wind hits him and carries the smell of burning fuel full into his face. He looks down the length of his carrier, past the warped, blackened deck, past the island structures smeared with smoke, and he can see men still working, still dragging hoses, still trying to hold back fire with sheer effort. He knows what it costs them to keep fighting. Kusaka joins him, and for a few seconds neither speaks. They are surrounded by the noise of war, but their silence forms a small pocket of stillness. Then Kusaka says what has been haunting him since the dive bombers fell. Their attack came at the exact moment our aircraft were being rearmed. They did not arrive randomly. His eyes narrow as he watches the smoke columns from the other carriers. They waited for our most vulnerable cycle. Nagumo's gaze stays outward. His voice is quiet, almost flat, which means they knew our plan and our timing. The sentence is simple, but it is also an accusation against the universe. For months, the Japanese Navy has moved with the confidence of a force that believes it holds the initiative. It has believed that the Americans are reactive, slow, and predictable. Midway was supposed to confirm that belief in blood. Instead, the Americans have appeared where they should not be, and they have struck when they should not be able to strike so perfectly. An officer approaches, hesitates, then speaks. "Admiral, communications from the fleet are asking for the status of the operation." Nagumo turns his head slightly. He knows what that message really means. Yamamoto is far away, still trying to shape the battle from a distance. The plan relied on precise coordination. Now, coordination is a ghost. Nagumo answers with a short order, telling them what can be said, but not everything. Not yet. There is shame in admitting the scale of the disaster, even when shame has no tactical value. As preparations continue, another thought emerges among the staff, whispered in small gaps between tasks. A thought about codes, about radio discipline, about the possibility that their signals were not as secure as they believed. It is not just paranoia. It is pattern recognition. Midway as bait, the American carriers in the perfect position, the timing that feels chosen. Kusaka speaks to one of the intelligence officers, his tone hard. "If the enemy read our intentions, how?" He does not need to finish the sentence. The officer's eyes flicker away, as if he is looking at something unpleasant inside his own mind. "Possibly traffic analysis," the officer murmurs. "Possibly compromised codes, or perhaps they guessed the objective and prepared." Kusaka's jaw tightens. In the Japanese Navy, to admit the possibility of code compromise is to admit vulnerability not only in equipment, but in honor. Yet the evidence is burning in front of them. Nagumo listens without comment, but his expression shifts. The realization is no longer just that they were ambushed. It is that the Americans may have been inside their planning process in some way, that the enemy might have been reading the board before the pieces were moved. That thought is colder than any wind. The transfer begins. Nagumo and his staff move down through smoky corridors, guided by sailors who know the safest routes. They pass wounded men being carried on stretchers, faces gray, lips cracked. They pass crews still fighting the flames, sweating through soaked clothing, eyes red from smoke. No one speaks loudly. There is a kind of reverence, as if the ship itself deserves silence in its suffering. They reach the side of the carrier where a destroyer comes alongside, rolling in the swell. The smaller ship looks fragile next to Akagi's towering hull. Yet it is the lifeboat of command. As Nagumo steps onto the transfer line, the world narrows to rope, water, and balance. The sea below is littered with debris. Oil shimmers in rainbow patches. A piece of aircraft fabric flaps against a floating beam. He makes it across. Boots landing on the destroyer's deck. Officers salute. The destroyer's captain bows. The formality is intact. But formality cannot hide the reality that the flagship is dying. From the destroyer, Nagumo turns and looks back at Akagi. Smoke pours from her like breath from a wounded animal. The deck is scorched. The ship is still afloat, still proud in silhouette. But the heart of her, the hangars and fuel stores, is a burning ruin. Kusaka stands beside him, eyes fixed on the carrier, as if by staring he can force it to survive. Nagumo's voice is barely audible over the wind. "We came to set a trap." He pauses, then continues, the words tasting bitter. "Instead, we were the ones caught." Kusaka answers with a quiet certainty. They had prepared for us. That sentence, spoken on the deck of a destroyer, carries more than tactical meaning. It is the sound of a worldview cracking. The Japanese Navy had believed its plan was clever enough to outthink the Americans. Midway proves that cleverness is not ownership of the future. Behind them, Akagi continues to burn. The fires rage in compartments they can no longer reach. The decision is made to scuttle her if necessary, to deny the enemy the prize and to end the suffering of the ship. As the afternoon light shifts, the smoke column thickens and spreads, and the battle's outcome becomes less a question and more a slow, brutal certainty. The ambush has not only destroyed ships, it has destroyed assumptions. Late afternoon, June 4th, 1942. The sea has become a graveyard with no markers. Smoke drifts low now, pushed by wind into long gray bands that stretch toward the horizon. The sun, still bright, looks dimmer through the haze. Like a lantern behind dirty glass, the destroyer carrying Nagumo and his staff moves carefully among wreckage and survivors. Men in the water call out in hoarse voices. Some cling to planks. Some float face down. Uniforms dark with seawater, hair plastered to skulls. Life rafts bob in the swell, and every time the destroyer's wake rolls through, the survivors rise and fall like leaves. Orders are given to pick up who they can. Sailors lean over the rails, grabbing arms, hauling men aboard by belts and shoulders. The rescued cough up oil and salt water and stare with wide eyes at the smoke columns where their carriers had been. Nagumo watches, his expression fixed, and he seems older than he did that morning. Not because hours have passed, but because certainty has burned away. The men around him feel it. The mood is not simply grief. It is a stunned quiet, the kind that follows a blow you did not see coming, somewhere in the distance. Akagi still burns, but the flames are lower now, more internal, as if the ship is burning from the inside out. Kaga and Soryu are already lost. Hiryu, once the last hope, is dying as well. A staff officer approaches with a message summary from what remains of the force. The words are careful, but the meaning is brutal. The carrier striking force is effectively destroyed. Remaining surface ships must withdraw. The operation's objective is no longer attainable. Nagumo takes the summary and reads it once, then folds it slowly. Folding paper becomes a ritual of control, a small act in a world where control has vanished. Kusaka stands nearby, and the two men share a look that contains more than a conversation ever could. They have served together long enough to understand each other's thoughts without language. But this time, words come anyway, because the realization needs to be named, if only to make it real. Kusaka speaks first, voice low and steady. The enemy carriers were positioned as if they knew exactly where we would be. He glances toward the faint outline of Midway's direction. Far away now. They did not chase us. They waited for us to arrive. Nagumo's jaw tightens. They turned our own operational logic against us. A younger officer, overhearing, cannot stop himself from asking the question that has been echoing through every mind since the bombs fell. Admiral, how could they know? Nagumo looks at him, and for a moment there is no anger, only exhaustion. He answers not with certainty, but with a list of possibilities that all taste bitter. They may have guessed our objective, they may have watched our movements, or they may have read our signals. He pauses, then adds, quieter, but the result is the same. The officer bows and steps away, but the words remain. Read our signals. That phrase is a blade. It implies a failure deep in the bloodstream of the fleet. Kusaka's expression hardens. If our communications were compromised, then this was not simply defeat in battle. It was defeat before battle. Nagumo does not contradict him. He looks back toward the smoke, toward the place where the Japanese Navy's pride burned in a single morning, and he understands the strategic shape of what has happened. Japan has lost not just ships, but veteran air crews, men trained over years, lost in minutes. The loss is not replaceable quickly. It will echo in future battles. The destroyer's captain approaches and requests permission to proceed with the final orders regarding Akagi. The tone is respectful, but there is urgency. Akagi is beyond saving. If she remains afloat, she might drift, she might be captured, she might explode and take others with her. Nagumo nods once. Proceed. As the destroyers close in, the act of scuttling is carried out with grim professionalism. Torpedoes are prepared. The crews know what it means to fire into their own flagship. It is a kind of mercy and a kind of mourning. A torpedo streaks into the water and disappears toward Akagi's hull. A moment later, the impact sends a dull thud through the air, more felt than heard. The carrier lists slightly. Smoke still pouring. Another torpedo follows. Another impact. From the destroyer's deck, Nagumo watches without moving. His eyes do not blink for long stretches. He is witnessing a symbol die. Kusaka stands beside him, and his voice breaks the silence with a statement that sounds like a verdict. It was an ambush designed for carriers. He gestures subtly, as if tracing the invisible lines of the enemy's plan. They waited until our decks were crowded with fueled aircraft and exposed munitions. That is not coincidence. Nagumo's answer is almost a whisper. No. The sea wind carries ash across the destroyer's deck. Tiny flecks settle on uniforms and hands. Sailors brush them away instinctively. But more keep coming, as if the battle is leaving its mark on skin. As Akagi begins to settle lower, the smoke column thins and the ship's silhouette changes, losing its proud, straight lines. It becomes a wounded shape slumping toward the sea. A sailor nearby mutters. Not to anyone in particular. So this is how it ends. Nagumo hears him. He does not reprimand him. The moment is too heavy for discipline. Instead, Nagumo turns his gaze outward again, toward the empty horizon where the American carriers are no longer visible. They have struck and slipped away, leaving only smoke and questions. The final realization settles over Nagumo and Kusaka with the certainty of sunset. Midway was not the decisive battle Japan planned, not the trap that would lure the Americans into destruction. It was the opposite. It was the place where the Americans proved they could anticipate, prepare, and strike with precision. Nagumo speaks one last time, not as an order, not as a report, but as a conclusion formed from fire, loss, and timing too perfect to deny. We walked into a prepared trap. Kusaka answers softly, almost to himself. And we did not see it until it closed. The destroyers turn away as Akagi sinks. The ocean swallows steel and flame, and the surface closes, leaving only oil, debris, and the slow drift of smoke. In the distance, Midway remains, a small atoll in a vast sea, but now it carries a meaning far larger than its size. It is the place where Japan learned that the enemy could read the battlefield before the first shot, and where Japanese admirals, surrounded by smoke and static, understood with sudden clarity that the operation had become the perfect ambush.